Welcome to the Live Like It's True podcast. Here on the show, my guests and I talk through some of the most interesting and astonishing stories of the Bible. And then we ask, how can we live like this story is true? I'm your host, Shannon Pepkin. I am an author, a speaker, and a Bible teacher. And here on the podcast, I'm inviting you to think of these stories in the Bible as containers for truth. Each one gives you a new way to reject the lies, to rehearse the truth, and to invite other people to do the same. So I hope that this episode is going to inspire you to better know the story, share the story, and live like the story is true. Tracie Miles is the best-selling author of 7 books. She is the director of Compel Pro Writers Training at Proverbs 31 Ministries, and she's the founder of the Living Unbroken Divorce Recovery Program. She has 3 grown children, a son-in-law and a daughter-in-law, and she lives in Charlotte, North Carolina. And today, Tracie's going to share the truth about new beginnings after life falls apart. Tracie, welcome to Live Like It's True.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
We're going to be talking about your brand new book, God's Got You, Embracing New Beginnings with Courage and Confidence. And so you talk in this book about lifequakes. Tell us first about the lifequake that happened 8 years ago. Yeah. And then I want to hear about some of the ways that God has brought you through that journey and the writing that has come out of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, sure. Well, a lot of people ask me what the definition of lifequake is.
Yes.
And so we can start with that. And it really can be something that comes about in your life. You're facing a new transition. You're in a new season of life. Something drastically changes where your life just kind of gets turned upside down. It could be something traumatic happen, something tragic happen, an end happens that you weren't expecting. And that's kind of what happened in my case. I had spent many years praying for my marriage and, asking God to heal where there was healing needed and just to have his hand on us and our family. And then things just weren't improving over a period of time. And I had a lifequake, and basically my entire life fell apart overnight when I became aware of a different life that my husband was living than I thought he was living, and then I thought we were living. Mm-hmm. So, and that wasn't the first situation that had happened. So it really just was almost past the point of reconciliation, even though that was attempted for a while. But as a result of that, I was kind of left with just me and my 3 children to pick up all of those pieces. So my life was kind of like being hit by an earthquake. So that's why I called it a lifequake, because everything just fell apart. It seemed like everything was falling through the cracks and just being destroyed and lost, and just didn't know which way to turn. I just really thought at that time, I had been doing speaking for 15 plus years with Proverbs 31 at women's events. I had been doing some writing, published a few books, and I really thought my ministry was over, that my life was over, that, my marriage was over. So apparently so was I, and everything that I thought it was. So it was just a really hard time. And whether someone's gone through divorce or not, or maybe it's something else, really upsetting or unsettling, something that's kind of turned their life upside down, you still all have the same emotions of, how am I going to get through this? And how am I going to recover and heal and rebuild and reinvent myself and my life and just all of those things. And so what I was telling you earlier is that at the time all of this happened, I had just received a new 2-book contract with my publisher. And so I was under this deadline to write a book. And of course I had no words in me. I'm like, God, I can't write this book. Right. If you knew this was coming, why would you give me this opportunity? How do you expect me to write from this pit that I am now in? And I don't have any idea how to pull myself up, much less have encouraging words to help other women pull themselves up. Right. But what I've found over the last few years is that God used the gift of writing and the call to be a writer that he had placed on my life many, many years ago as a way to heal my own heart, but also to share my journey as I was doing so. And so out of that divorce situation, even though if I could change it, that's not what anybody wants their story to be. I certainly would have loved for it to have been different, but that was the story God had for me. And it's taken me a long time to embrace that turned out to be the good thing. That was the good plan that God had for me, even though it's not what we think about from a worldly perspective as the greatest outcome. But
For
sometimes,
sure.
his plans, they're just not our plans. And so with regards to separation and divorce and just the pain that so many women would pour out to me that they were going through, he just gave me a passion to help other women know you're going to survive. And I've got good plans for you no matter what. So all of that kind of led up to the book that we're talking about today called God's Got You. And that's just about embracing new beginnings, because I think that's the journey as I look back and I see my own journey. Like, I've got to figure out why I'm wavering in my faith. How do I survive that? And then how do I pick up those pieces and move forward now? Now I'm ready to go. I want to make things different. And I want people to know that they can make plans and that God's got them. So he's got them in the valleys, and then he's going to carry them up onto the top of the mountains. And so we just have to trust him for that and work towards that.
Well, you just compacted, a whole bunch of life there into 5 minutes. And I am hearing you talk about Tracie, the wife, Tracie, the mom, Tracie, the writer and the speaker, and, how all of those overlap. And, just the pain of this lifequake, as you call it, this thing that changed all of that. It didn't just change your marriage, right? Sounds like you had invested a lot in trying to overcome some challenges. And so this was not a first time offense. This was a repeated pattern. And so, yeah, just losing, trying, doing what you can. I have a book called Control Girl. So you and I maybe have some things in common with wanting things to be under our own control, right? And I find it helpful to segment out what I can control and what I cannot control. And so I think it's wise to invest in a relationship or invest in a job or invest in a future, whatever it is. And yet also keep in mind there are things that are out of our control.
Exactly.
You were walking through this horrible experience of losing so much, and yet God using that not only in your own life, but as you are this broken vessel, being poured out. So thank you for your ministry and allowing us to kind of journey there with you, right? With these different books and experiencing the different kind of the aftermath, right? Of the lifequake. And so we get you here on this interview. You're 8 years past this, and God has done a lot of rebuilding in your life. And so I wanted us to talk about, there's a passage in your book where you're talking about this verse from Jeremiah 29:11. And Tracie, I love you because you're just so honest. You're like, okay, I'm a Jesus girl, but I'm not necessarily a theologian. And I was reading this verse for a long time, and I was just kind of maybe misinterpreting it for myself. Jeremiah 29:11, that's a verse that a lot of us know. Maybe we've memorized. It says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." And so how did you put it there, Tracie? You said, I've kind of made it like me and my little old life and my little plans, right?
Little old me.
Yeah, little old me.
Yeah.
And so how did God open your eyes, though, to looking at that verse differently?
Well, I was really just, when you're going through something that's just so difficult, you can either shut the door to God and turn away from him, or you can turn towards him. And just because thankfully he's been so involved in just intervening in my life for so many years, that I was really still very strong in my faith, but it was a struggle to get up every morning and think, okay, what terrible thing's going to happen today that's going to pile onto the mountain of the terribleness that I'm already living in. Yeah. And so I really was just searching God's word, and that verse that, Jeremiah 29:11, I have always thought, okay, God's got good plans for me. He said he'd prosper me. All things are going to be good. But so I just wanted to read it again. So I'm just reading it. I just kind of looked it up. Let me just read this verse again. But as I was looking at it, I kind of started seeing it from a different perspective. And he kind of opened my eyes in a new way. And suddenly, even though the words did not change at all, I realized this verse isn't meant just for me. It's, it's not, it can be my life theme verse, but it was not meant just for me. And I think when we're faced with hard transitions, it's the context of this verse that can truly give us the hope that we need, because it's not implying that God's just going to fix everything and everything's going to be perfect and,
Yes.
beautiful and lots of sunshine and roses. It means he's got a bigger picture. He's got wonderful plans for us as individuals, but maybe not right in that second. We just kind of view it as it's assuring us that, oh, well, everything's going to be great and turn
Yes,
out wonderful.
it's
And
true.
there's just a lot deeper context to that. And that's kind of when I figured out that day that it's a promise that we have to think beyond ourselves and our
Hmm.
problems and our lives, and trust in his sovereignty no matter what, even if
Hmm.
our problems don't change, because he still has a plan, even if we don't see it play out. But sometimes
Hmm.
it takes longer than we would like.
Yeah, so true. And I do think there is a problem with misappropriating verses or promises from God that don't belong to us personally in our little slice of the timeline. Like the Bible is a book that encompasses all of history, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we're good Bible students when we look at the original text and the original audience and what
Mm-hmm.
God is saying in this particular moment in history. So this verse is in a book called Jeremiah, and the prophet Jeremiah is not a very popular prophet. If you read the early texts in Jeremiah, it's like, oh my goodness, he is going after God's people. He compares them to prostitutes. He's like, you're going after
Mm-hmm.
everything else. God is your faithful husband in the relationship. He's the provider, the protector, and you're looking to everything else. And that's who Jeremiah is. He is not holding back at all. Does not mince words. He is faithful to deliver God's very harsh messages to the people. First, Jeremiah predicted that Israel was going to fall to Babylon. God's promises were that God's people would live in God's promised land and that they would have, a land flowing with milk and honey. Like that's how it was supposed to be. And they got there and now they're not there anymore. They're exported to Babylon. And he predicted that. So he's the guy who predicted this bad thing was going to happen. And he also advised the people, the nation of Israel, God's people, he advised them to surrender to Nebuchadnezzar. Nobody wanted to hear that. And so he's sending this letter in Jeremiah 29 to the surviving people of Israel who are captives in Babylon. And so he's sending this letter through this guy named Elisa, I think, or Elisa. I don't know. So this is a letter. And, we kind of picture the people gathering to hear this letter. And I would love for you to read verses 4-9 in the NIV translations. Go ahead, Tracie.
Okay. Jeremiah 29, verses 4-9. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and settle down, plant gardens and eat what they produce, marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they may too have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease. Also seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Yes, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Do not let the prophets and diviners among you deceive you. Do not listen to the dreams you encourage them to have. They are prophesying lies to you in my name. I have not sent them, declares the Lord.
God's promises are like a set of parentheses. The first one is when he makes the promise. The second one is when he keeps it. And you never have one without the other. But often there's this long stretch between the two, much longer than we first imagined, right? That's what we see in Sarah's story found in Genesis 12-21. God promised a son, but in this wide stretch between the parentheses, she wondered, would God keep his promises? Could he? I'm Shannon Popkin, inviting you to come find the answer to those questions, both for Sarah and yourself, in my brand new 6-week Bible study titled Shaped by God's Promises, Lessons from Sarah on Fear and Faith. Find out how you too can be shaped by God's promises in the waiting. Okay. So here's this letter. Let's start with the first part. He's telling them, build houses, settle down, like you're here to stay. Why is this surprising to these people who are in exile?
Well, they're ready to get to the promised land. They
want to
want all
go
the good
home.
things. They're probably sitting there thinking, and this is one of the correlations that I had is, how did I get here?
Mm-hmm.
This is not where I'm supposed to be. This is not what I like. This is not what I envisioned, but this is where God has you. And I'm sure that's how they're feeling too, is why are we here? This is not what you promised. This is not what I thought, life was going to be like. And so I just imagine them hearing these words and they're like, hey, wait a minute. Something's not adding up here.
Yeah. They're like, they want the message of we're going back, or like, pray that Babylon falls and we can be set free, not plant a garden like that. That
Right.
when you plant a garden, you're expecting to be there at least for a season, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And get married, build houses. Wait, what? Build a house? Like we're supposed to be in the tents. Like we're the people who are in the tents until we're in the promised land. You're telling us to stay here and build a house? Like that's for permanent. That is not what we want to hear from God. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I imagine, Tracie, that's a little bit what it felt like after your divorce. Maybe earlier, before the divorce, you were like, let's work on this. Let's get this fixed. Not let's move to I don't know. Did you move to a new house? Did you what were the ways that you had to plant a garden, settle down after this divorce that kind of made it feel final?
Well, that's a loaded question because there's so many things. Because unfortunately, my ex-husband just left. I mean, that was the end of it, even with regards to the children and the finances and everything. So we were kind of left with the destruction of everything that's left behind when a lifequake happens. And so just trying to figure out how we're going to keep food on the table. The mortgage is getting months behind and possibly going into foreclosure. And I had to get rid of my car. And, so all these tangible things that we're having to deal with, how we're going to pay for college. I'm trying to get loans. I'm finding out about debts that I didn't know that we had that were in my name. So I wasn't able to sell the house for a variety of reasons for many years. So there were so many different things that we had to deal with in the aftermath of that.
Yeah. Did you want to just sell it so you could get out from under the memories and the history there? Or was it just a financially more feasible to move?
It was more of a financial thing because that had been our family home. Brought my babies home there. They were all in, high school and college, and that was our home. So there were a lot of memories, but it was more financial than anything else.
Well, these verses, they almost sound like warm and like build a house, settle down, plant a garden. Right. But these people are in captivity. This is not a happy, I just saw on your Instagram, your daughter bought a house with her husband, right? Yeah. And I mean, these are exciting, fun times in your life. There's a new baby coming in your family too. Or is it 2 babies coming?
2 babies are coming. Yes.
Yes. I mean, that's so exciting.
All around.
All sorts of new beginnings. And these are wonderful times. And yet to picture that in a land that is not, your captives, that just puts a damper on everything. And so we have to read that into this context. This does sound kind of sweet and build a house, plant a garden. No, this is don't go home. Ever, in your lifetime, don't go home. And I mean, in verse 4, he says, to those I carried into exile, God brought them here. And that's really hard as his people to wrestle with. Why, God, would you bring me here? And why would I am a woman of God. I'm following you. I'm trying to raise these kids to your glory. And yet, why would you leave us here with no dad in the picture? No husband, no dad. And I got to figure out how to pay for college. These are really hard things. And so I think there is a parallel with the desolation that you were feeling and that they were feeling. Yes. And yet what I hear you is in those times when there's this lifequake, maybe towards the beginning, you were dealing with all the things that were out of your control. I got to lay those down. I got to lay down these dreams. I have to surrender to God. But in this season, it's time to talk about what can I do? What should I do? How should I move forward and make plans? And, let's just settle into this is not going to be the way that I hoped. But yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So how has God taught you through that?
Well, I mentioned that he has just kind of shown his hand and his fingerprints all throughout my life. And in hindsight, I can see that. And I was getting so upset just since we're talking about the house sale, because I even had an offer. I went so far one time as to have it listed. I had a great offer. I had this beautiful little family, which was devastating for me, but I was like, okay, I'm going to get out from this debt. But then there were a lot of financial things and things against the house that I wasn't aware of until I became aware. So it was like I would take one step forward and two step backs, and it was just constant frustration. But despite all of that, the day did come when I finally said, okay, well, this is just what I have to deal with. God's given me the strength. He's given me the wisdom. I've got this experience that's helped me be able to tackle all these problems that I'm dealing with. I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. So I can choose to be miserable, or I can choose to be happy where God has me. It may not be where I wanted to be, but that is where he has me. And I think that's a major decision that is just a game changer in everybody's life, no matter whether you're male, female, young, old, whatever transition season you find yourself in or lifequake you've experienced. We have to get up every day and decide, am I going to be happy today with even the littlest of blessings, or am I going to be miserable today? And I got to the point to where I was tired of being miserable, and I wanted to start, and God had provided. He provided financially. You hear these stories all the time of people saying, hey, we got this in checks in the mail, and we got this, and just, and somebody did something for me, and this just worked out miraculously. But it happened in my life, and I saw it time and time and time again. And so it just kind of kept boosting my faith that, okay, we'll just take the next step, and then take the next step, and just keep trusting that God's, we don't know his plan. I don't understand his plan. I don't really like the plan, but he has a plan. And that's what I just had to keep going back to is this is the land that he has me in right now. And I have to cultivate it and live in it and make the best of it. And that's really just a foundational truth, Jeremiah 29, as I was reading it that day and got that different perspective.
Yeah. I mean, if we back up all the way, we recognize that we're all in exile. This is not like we're in exile from the Garden of Eden, right? God intended for us to be living forever in his beautiful creation. And we're like at the beginning of Jeremiah, where we've gone after everything else. We have not been faithful to God. He's always been faithful to us, but we have not. And so we chose this exile for ourselves. And so we're waiting on the new creation. All of us are in exile. Even if we get the new house, we get the baby, whatever it is. Like there are happy things that happen along the way, but we're not in Eden and we know it. And so to some extent, we're all having to choose how is this exile going to play out? Am I going to just be a passive, like it's just happening to me and I can do nothing about it? Or are we going to live where God has placed us and plant the garden, sell the house, write the book, choose the happy demeanor when the kids wake up, like whatever it is, how are we going to live in this exile? And like, these are God's instructions for his people. And I mean, maybe it doesn't exactly 1-to-1 parallel with us, but he's telling them to pray for the city that they're in, seek peace and prosperity of this city where God has, again, he says, to which I have carried you into exile. This is God's plan for them. And pray to the Lord for it, because as this city prospers, you will prosper also. We each have a choice of how our life is going to affect those around us. I mean, we can't, and to some degree, we can't get ourselves back to the promised land on our own. Like there are so many things that are out of our control, but we can plant a garden, have good relationships, like as far as it depends on us. Like we can invest in people, invest in our neighborhoods, invest in our church. We can live in exile with a bigger perspective. And I just want to ask you too, though, about verse 8, where God says, there are these other prophets and these other people saying that they have dreams and that, prophecies, and they're saying they're from God. And so these are the people who are saying like, no, this is not going to be a long time where you're going to be in exile. God's going to send you back to the promised land. It's going to happen really quick. Babylon's going to fall. They're predicting all of these things. And God's like, no, I didn't say that. And so do you see any parallels with what we as Christians do? We have people who are telling us things that God hasn't said to us, like giving us false hope?
I'm sure that we all do have that. And I would think that if someone tells us that, it's probably with the best intention. It's not to,
right,
steer you down the wrong path or be something against maybe what, false prophecy, if we want to term it that way. But people that until you walk in someone's shoes, you don't know what they're facing. You don't know how they're feeling. You don't know their struggles. But what you do know is you want to keep them going. You want to encourage them.
Yes.
You want them to keep doing the work and keep planting the gardens. And I can only assume that was their intention, was to keep them doing that. But in our own lives, I think we just need to make sure that we're discerning things from a biblical perspective and seeking what God's saying and not just what other people are saying. Because eventually, even though, and you could have friends and say, yeah, this is bad. This is a bad situation you're in. I have no idea how you're ever going to get out of it. You probably aren't going to survive it. You could have somebody saying that because that might feel like a reality. But we just have to keep going back to that faith and believing that even though we don't understand God's plan, we don't understand why we're in this exile or just really difficult circumstance or new season that we're facing, that God does have a plan, and just keep holding on to that hope, and that we may see it in our lifetime, but whether we do or not, we can still live with the joy that Christ offers despite where we are.
Yeah. Yep. I just keep going back to the fact that God has said twice here that he carried them into exile. So like this was his plan, right? And so there are people, you're talking about those who would be like very sweetly or, just wanting to encourage you and saying like, I'm sure this is all going to turn out. It's going to be, maybe your husband's going to come back, or maybe, your kids are going to be fine. And I don't find all of those promises in the Bible. That everything's going to turn out the way that I hoped, that all the bad things are going to get reversed and erased. I do ultimately in the new creation. If you extend it all the way out to there, yes, all of God's promises for his people will come true when Jesus returns and sets everything right. And we get to live forever in the new creation, where there is no more sin and no more brokenness and no more exile like that. If you extend the timeline out that far, but just for my lifetime here in the here and now, there just are not a lot of promises for prospering like he's saying, pray for this city as it prospers, you will prosper. But we don't have, for them, that's not the kind of prospering they wanted. They wanted to be back in the promised land. They wanted their freedom. They wanted to be independent. They did not want to be in exile. And so, yeah, I think we can fall off in one of two directions. We can either suppose that God is going to fix it all here in my lifetime, and I can trust him because he's going to make this all right. Or we can fall off in the other ditch and say, God doesn't know anything about this. He is not in control. He doesn't see me. He's not invested. And so I can't trust him, and I'm going to have to just do this myself. Right. And neither of those are correct. And so we have to stay on the path in the middle, saying like, yes, this is an exile that I am in. God is eventually going to make all things right. But for the moment, he has me in this exile, and I can trust him. That's really what you've lived here, Tracie. But how has God himself been faithful to you in this time?
Well, I mentioned a few things. Just the financial provision was amazing.
Yeah.
And I did, after many, many months of searching for employment, because I had been a speaker and a writer, but that's very supplemental. It certainly wasn't supporting our livelihood. And I was so frustrated because God just wasn't opening the door for me to get a job. And I was so qualified. I'd spent 15 years in the corporate world prior to doing speaking and I was a corporate trainer, and I kind of wore a lot of hats. And then he opened just the perfect door, and I got a job offer on my birthday that year with
Oh,
Proverbs 31 Ministries. So it was
okay.
like, I had a good plan. You just had
Okay.
to wait for the right time and the right
Huh.
time. And I've seen just so many examples of, I call them God incidences, not coincidences, but
Okay.
just precision on dates. And if that can't kind of perk your ears up with, okay, maybe God is in charge of our lives and down
Hmm.
to every detail, but
Yeah.
just
He knows
so
the
many
day.
times.
He knows the
He
day you were
does.
born. He
He does.
knows.
He knows the hairs on your head. So
Yeah.
it just gives you kind of that little boost of faith. I talk about this in God's Got You later on in the book, but our wedding day was May 26th. And of course, that became a day that was no longer celebrated and actually
Sure.
dreaded.
Yeah.
And then when I finally did sell the house, which ended up being huge for, financial provision also going forward, I closed on my old home and had to close the door on that chapter of my life on May 26th. And I
Wow.
opened the door to my brand new home that I never thought I'd be able to get on May 26th. And
Wow.
then I kicked off I've have been doing author coaching because God just is like, okay, you've been doing this writing. I've given you this opportunity. Now help other people share their message. And I
Mm.
really have a passion for that. That's why I work at Compel Pro writers training at Proverbs, but along with writing my own book. So I was very leery about taking that step of, do I have the time and the capacity? And I'm having to spend all this money on my website and marketing and all these things.
Right.
And this is really what I'm supposed to be doing. And I was very hesitant. So I just sent the email to all my email subscribers on my website and just kind of held my breath. If I don't get any clients, fine. I tried. I'll just mark it up as something I tried. I
Right.
took a step forward, and I felt God whisper to my spirit, what's the date? What's today's date? And it was the exact day of when my husband had left 7 years earlier.
Oh,
And it just brought me to tears because I thought that is not ironic. That's just another God
no.
incident. And then I also talk in the book about just the significance of the number seven and how, it signifies completion in so many ways, in so many
Mm.
different things God talks about that scripture tells us about. So I'm certainly not complete, or nothing is complete at all. Lots of work for me to do on myself, my life, everything. But it just kind of helped me see how God brings things full circle,
Hmm.
and he is into the details of our lives. And it took a long time to get to that place, but it was the closing of a chapter, but it just helped me really embrace this concept of new beginnings. And we
Yeah.
have to embrace new beginnings. And
Yes.
that's where the passion for God's Got You came from, is that we have to have the courage in him. And that's what I want to encourage, people to do, is just believe that one chapter ended, that means a new season is beginning, and we can embrace it and trust that it's a new beginning. Even if it's not where we thought we were going to be,
Yeah.
it's still something new and fresh, and God's got
Hmm.
good things. We have to work to make things happen. We can keep wishing things would be different and
Yes.
wishing things would happen and wishing for our life to be different. But if we don't start setting goals, taking action, being strategic, having faith in God, then nothing's going to change. So
Hmm.
through this book, I really want to encourage people, don't just keep sitting and thinking and wishing that things are different. Start believing they can be and start taking the action.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's what I hear God saying. Like, it takes work to build a house, right? It takes work to plant a garden. It takes
Mm-hmm.
work to plan a wedding, right? These are plans, and you're involved. You're investing in the future, not just for yourself, but for those around you. And yet in that process, Tracie, I love how seen you were by God in those moments, like to choose the exact dates for the day that your husband left. Like, that's the exile. That's the past. And yet in this, it's not like it's all fixed. It's not like it's exactly what you hoped for your family. And even I'm sure this ministry that 7 years later, God opened the door for this ministry. I'm sure it's not just a breeze, and it's never hard.
Yeah.
Like, no, you're still investing, and you're investing in other people and in those who will read these books that are going to be produced from your ministry here at Compel Pro. So talk to the woman though, or the man who's listening, who is like maybe newly in this lifequake, newly in exile, who really just wants to get back to how things were supposed to be,
Mm-hmm.
right? How can they live like it's true that this exile is where God has them for now. And yet God is the one who tells us to plant the garden, settle down, right?
Mm-hmm.
Make plans.
Well, I think one of the first things you have to do is you just have to accept that this is where God had you or has you. And that's one thing I struggled with. So for many, many months, which is common for anyone that goes through something traumatic, I couldn't accept this is my life. Like, is this real life? Is this really how things are going to stay? And so for quite a while, I was in a lot of depression and anxiety and stress and, just under so many burdens trying to carry everything. And just the devastation of life ending as you once knew it. But when I finally did get to that date where I'm like, I'm tired of being miserable. I'm sad. I want to be happy again. So it really starts with just saying, okay, this is where God has planted me right now. It's not what I envisioned. It's not what I thought. It's maybe not what I wanted, but we just have to accept it. And until we accept it, then we can't embrace what's next.
Right.
So that would be my first tip is accept it, embrace where you are, and then start looking forward to the new beginnings that God has in store for you, because there will be good things. He can restore all things. He's restored so many things in my life. We have countless passages in the Bible that talk about his power of transformation and restoration and even the worst of circumstances and situations. And we're no different than any of those people that we read about in Scripture. God is capable, but we have to open our hearts enough to let him in.
Yeah, I think, we can live like it's true that God has us, right? He has us in this time. So Tracie, tell us where we can find this book, God's Got You, and your other ministries. Where can people connect with you?
Yeah, I'd love for them to do that. You can find God's Got You at any book retailer. On any retailer site. Amazon is obviously the most popular. The Proverbs 31 Ministries bookstore, it can also be found there, and really just anywhere, any Christian books, Goodreads, any of those things. And my website is traciemiles.com, and Tracie is spelled with an I-E, which is a little unusual. Just traciemiles.com. And if you subscribe to my blog, then you'll get my blog post, and also my author coaching services are available on that site as well.
So we'll send links to all of those things in the show notes. But thank you so much for reminding us that God's got us, right? Yeah. He's got you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Can I just remind you that each of these stories from the Bible is absolutely true. Rather than giving us a list of facts to memorize about himself, God gave us a book filled with stories, and each one helps us to know him and to understand this overarching story that we are all in. So I hope that you'll take some time looking at this story in your Bible. To help you study, I've put together my free Live Like It's True workbook, which includes my false narratives watch list, my story elements bookmark, and more. Live Like It's True is part of the Resound Podcast Network. For more gospel-centered resources, visit resoundmedia.cc. We've got that link for you, along with links to any of the other resources that we've mentioned in the show notes. Thanks so much for joining me, and now it's time to go live like it's true.